So I recently read the first 3 volumes of the Pokémon Adventures manga for the very first time, and I know that I'm probably nearly 30 years too late on this, but I finally got around to picking up the collector's edition and sitting down and reading it from start to finish, and I really liked it a lot, but it actually got me thinking whether or not the Pokemon game should maybe take some pointers from the manga. For those of you who haven't read it, the first 3 volumes do follow the story of Red, Blue, and Yellow games quite closely. It follows a protagonist named Red who wants to become one of the greatest Pokemon trainers ever and eventually grows stronger and battles a bunch of different trainers, takes down Team Rocket, and eventually becomes the champion of the Kanto region. So that little synopsis tells you that the main story beats are more or less the same, but the differences between the manga and the games, I think, make the manga's story a lot more interesting than the actual game story. One of the few notable things is that Team Rocket in the manga is actually a threat. Like, I know Team Rocket was still a threat in the original games, but in the manga, Team Rocket has actually infiltrated the gym leaders. Half of the gym leaders are part of Team Rocket, and they're all working towards capturing all the legendary Pokemon, the legendary birds, and they're actually working to create Mewtwo. But as Red goes through the different gym leaders, he goes through Brock and Pewter City, he goes to Misty and Cerulean City, and they're pretty similar to how you would expect them to act in the anime and in the games as well. So they're obviously the good guys. Lieutenant Surge was the first Team Rocket member, gym leader, so Red actually had to fight him not only to get his badge, but also to defeat a member of Team Rocket. And when I talk about Team Rocket actually being a threat in the manga, it's because they don't hesitate to kill a child. Like, they won't hold back in torturing or killing these Pokemon trainers, which is not something you really got to see in the games. Like, it was always kind of implied because they would do horrible things to the Pokemon, so you would figure, all right, what's stopping them from doing horrible things to people? But in the manga, you actually see Lieutenant Surge would trap Red and basically electrocute him with his Magnemite, and Red would just be screaming in pain the whole time. But that's not the only instance this happens. It also happens without Team Rocket present as well. The Pokemon in this universe are straight up savage, and it reminds me of the way Pokemon are portrayed in Legends Arceus, how when you're roaming the lands, you encounter wild Pokemon and they could just attack you. You don't have to have a Pokemon out to battle. They will just go right for you, the trainer, the human being. Little things like that kind of make the world feel more or less alive and realistic. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, it's a comic about tiny little animal characters that have superpowers, essentially. But this extra layer just makes it more enjoyable for me. And the fact that at the end of the day, this is a children's manga, I feel like it's impressive that they went through the lengths to include this in there, and they had the confidence that the kids reading it would probably be able to handle these more mature takes on Pokemon as a whole. Like, a quick example of this is when Red goes into the Safari Zone and he gets chased down by a Nidoking. Eventually he gets trapped by a bunch of Victory Bell and Weeping Bell, and the Victory Bell is about to eat him. Like, you can see the stomach acid in its mouth bubbling, and he's like centimeters away from getting dropped into it. So it really does make you feel like, okay, these characters are actually in danger. Even though it's very cartoony and goofy at times, you kind of feel like their lives could end at any moment. Another cool addition, I think, is that they decided to add a bit of lore into how Mewtwo was actually created. So in the games, it was discussed that Team Rocket essentially created Mewtwo from the DNA of Mew. However, in the manga, and at least I think it's only in the manga, I do not remember this in the games, but in the manga they say that Blaine took parts of his own DNA and helped create Mewtwo. And they kind of play off of that, where his cells and Mewtwo cells are kind of linked in certain ways, and that eventually Blaine's arm is gonna infect the rest of his body and is gonna take his life. I thought it was just cool how they connected Blaine and Mewtwo and gave more of a backstory to it. And speaking of Mewtwo real quick, they gave him a giant spoon, which at first I thought it looked kind of silly, but the way he fought with it, I know it's like a symbol for telekinesis and, you know, bending the spoon and whatnot, but having this giant spoon as like a weapon and he just like smacks people with it, I thought it was really neat. I don't totally know how it would work in the games, but I feel like if they gave Mewtwo in the games just some kind of callback to that, it would be really awesome. Going back to Team Rocket real quick, I absolutely love how they handle Giovanni here. So in the games, you kind of first encounter Giovanni in Silph.Co, and you're aware throughout fighting Team Rocket that there's like this big ringleader, and you know, he's really powerful, and you eventually come across him again in the 8th gym in Viridian City, not knowing that he's actually the gym leader, so it comes as a shock to you as the player. But here he's introduced much earlier. In fact, I believe he's introduced around Mount Moon. Red goes through the cave and he encounters this guy who he just bumps into, and Giovanni acts very friendly with him, and it's very off-putting because you can tell something's off with him. He has like some sinister motives behind him, and he's like kind of scoping Red out to make sure whether or not Red is I guess maybe worthy of being an opponent for him down the line. So I thought it was very interesting how they went about doing that and foreshadowing him later on in the story. And eventually Red, Blue, and Green all kind of end up at Silph.Co, and they take out Team Rocket one by one. So they took out Sabrina, they took out Koga. There's like this full spread panel of all 3 starters. You know, Red's Venusaur, Blue's Charizard, Green's Blastoise. They were all synchronizing their attack, and it reminds me of the Final Smash in for Pokemon Trainer and in Super Smash Brothers. And it was just really, really cool to see. And I feel like Pokemon needs to have these like big spectacle events throughout the story, and I think they're kind of trying to at a point. Unfortunately, they're sacrificing a lot of other things, but that's a whole different discussion. I kind of talked about that in a whole different video. If you're interested in watching that, the time card is up at the top. But regardless, it was an awesome fight, and it'd be great to see that translate into a Pokemon game. Throughout the manga, Red just continues to catch different Pokemon and build up his team. It's cool to see them all level up and evolve, and eventually he gets to the Pokemon League, and it's between him, Blue, Green, and some unknown character. Eventually, we find out it's Professor Oak. I don't know if this was an intentional callback or not, since Professor Oak was never really a barrier for the player at the end of the Pokemon League. It was a cut piece of content, but Professor Oak showed up here and was one of the contenders to fight in the Pokemon League, and he fought against Green and ended up beating her. And since he felt like he didn't need to continue in the tournament, he backed out. So ends up being Red versus Blue. Red ends up beating Blue, and he becomes the champion of the Pokemon League. Now, we don't get to see the Elite Four here, but they do come into play in the next few volumes of the story. Overall, the main story of the manga is pretty similar to the games, and I really enjoyed reading these first 3 volumes, and I'm going to continue reading the next 3 because I have the next collector's edition book, and I'm going to try to read all 10 of them. And if I want to continue, I'll probably have to find the other individual volumes, see how far the story goes. I think as of right now, it's up to Gen 6, but it also might be on hiatus. I think one of the writers or artists are not in the best shape, unfortunately, and they're probably taking a little bit of rest. But I'm hopeful to see parts of the manga kind of get incorporated into the games, and I feel in certain ways they are. You know, just as I mentioned earlier that the Savage Pokemon kind of remind me of Legends Arceus, and in Pokemon Scarlet Violet, that whole end sequence with the player's mother or father, depending on which game you're playing, that was kind of crazy. That went really hard. But I feel like they just like sprinkle it in here and there. If they can just deliver us a more mature story fully throughout, I think we'll have something like really special on our hands. But I'm actually curious to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know in the comments down below whether or not you've actually read the Pokemon manga at all. Let me know if you like it or if you're not into it. Let me know if you agree with me in terms of having the Pokemon games take some aspects from the manga story and incorporate it into a way to give us a more mature Pokemon game experience. I appreciate you all for watching all the way till the end, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.